All right, let's dive right into this explainer and play pest detective for a little while. Today, we're learning how to read the incredibly subtle clues left behind by these silent destroyers lurking in our homes. We're talking about wood-destroying insects. You know, these tiny culprits cause billions of dollars in structural damage every single year, and it usually goes completely undetected until it is way too late. But by the end of our time together, you are going to know exactly how to read a piece of damaged wood the same way a crime scene investigator reads a fingerprint. Here is our suspect lineup for today. First, we'll meet the suspects. 2. Subterranean and Formosan termites. 3. Drywood and dampwood termites. 4. The wood-boring beetles. 5. The carpenter ants. And finally, 6. We'll test your detective skills. Let's kick things off with Section 1, Meet the Suspects. Now, in the world of structural pests, misidentification is absolutely the fastest way to botch an investigation. Homeowners panic all the time about finding what they call white ants, but you can easily separate a relatively harmless swarming ant from a highly destructive termite by checking just 3 distinct features. With a termite, you want to look for straight beaded antennae, a really broad, thick waist, and if it has wings, all 4 are going to be exactly equal in lengths. Now compare that to an ant, which has elbowed antennae, a severely pinched waist, and front wings that are significantly longer than the back ones. Moving right along to Section 2, Subterranean and Formosan termites. Let's look at our first major crime syndicate. This is a group that relies on immense underground networks to pull off their heists. When you map out the jurisdictions of these particular suspects across the U.S., you'll see the eastern subterranean termite is actually the most common species nationwide. But as you head further west, the western and desert species really start to dominate. The desert subterranean termite, for instance, is incredibly prevalent in the southwest, featuring pale swarmers and colonies that can easily reach up to 300,000 individuals. But to really put things into perspective, let's talk about a terrifying number, 1 million. That is the scale of a single Formosan subterranean termite colony. This is a highly invasive species that was actually introduced to South Carolina back in 1957 on recycled railroad timbers. Ever since then, they've spread aggressively through southern coastal communities. Unlike our native species, they are incredibly aggressive and can consume wood at just an astonishing rate. So if you're out in the field inspecting a property, you absolutely need to know their specific calling cards. First, you're looking for soldiers with teardrop-shaped heads, which is totally different from the rectangular heads of native termites. And if you catch them swarming at night, take a close look at their wings. A Formosan swarmer wing is yellowish-orange. It's uniquely covered in tiny little hairs, and it features exactly 2 strong veins on the leading edge. If you find these, you are dealing with a massive million-member threat. Up next is Section 3, Drywood and Dampwood termites. Let's pull the files on what I like to call the moisture misfits. They operate under entirely different environmental rules than their subterranean cousins, and the contrast is pretty fascinating. Damp wood termites are exactly what they sound like. They absolutely require highly saturated, wet wood to survive, which makes them super common in areas with leaks or severe moisture issues. But drywood termites? They are elusive. They require absolutely zero contact with the soil and actually thrive in wood with less than 15% moisture. That means they can hollow out a perfectly dry attic beam or a piece of antique furniture without ever touching the ground. Because they are so secretive, you have to hunt for very specific evidence. If you notice pale yellow swarmers flying around at night, grab a magnifying glass and check their wings. You'll see 4 distinct veins running along the leading edge of the wing. That immediately identifies them as drywood termites, setting them totally apart from the 2-veined subterraneans we just talked about. But the ultimate smoking gun for drywood termites? It's the fecal pellets. Since they live in completely dry environments, they have to extract every possible drop of moisture from their waste. What they end up kicking out of their galleries are these hard, dry pellets that range from creamy to black in color. And if you look really closely, they feature 6 perfectly concave sides. Miraculously, they never change shape, size, or color over time. Spotting a pile of these means you've got a confirmed case. Moving on to Section 4, the wood-boring beetles. Let's shift our investigation entirely now, away from termites and over to beetles. With wood-boring beetles, finding the culprit is almost entirely about analyzing the crime scene itself, specifically the exact shape, size, and texture of the exit holes they leave behind. But first, a quick suspect comparison. Pulling out that magnifying glass again, we can separate the destructive true powder post beetle from a common nuisance flower beetle. Just look at the antenna. The powder post beetle has a distinct two-segmented club at the end, while the flower beetle has three. Also, you'll see the powder post beetle has distinctive globular eyes, whereas the flower beetle's eyes wrap completely around the side of its head. These microscopic details literally make or break an investigation. Think of this evidence log as your ultimate cheat sheet. You can actually match the crime scene to the exact beetle suspect based purely on the diameter of the exit hole and the texture of the sawdust, or frass, left behind. From the tiny holes and silky frass of the true powder post to the much larger oval holes of the old house borer, the wood itself tells the story of who chewed their way out. For example, if you find incredibly fine, silky frass that feels almost like talcum powder, with zero distinct pellets in it, and it's accompanied by tiny round exit holes measuring just 1/32 to 1/8 of an inch, you have a confirmed true powder post beetle infestation. Another massive clue is that they exclusively attack hardwoods. So if you see this happening in an oak floor or a hickory cabinet, you know exactly who did it. Now contrast those tiny pinpricks with a much more chaotic crime scene. When you have much larger, oval-shaped exit holes measuring between 1/4 and 3/8 of an inch across, with frass inside that's tightly packed and very coarse, you're looking right at the old house borer. And here's a super helpful behavioral quirk for this one. They exclusively target softwoods that are less than 10 years old, so knowing the age and the type of the wood instantly narrows down your suspect list. All right, Section 5, the carpenter ants. Our final suspect category brings us to insects that are fascinating precisely because their motive for destruction is completely different from everything else we've looked at today. Unlike termites and wood-boring beetles, carpenter ants are strictly builders. These relatively large nocturnal ants actually can't digest cellulose at all. They chew through your home's framing just to create smooth, sprawling nesting galleries. They're essentially excavating luxury apartments inside your walls, biting off chunks of wood and just tossing them aside. Because they don't actually eat the wood, their signature calling card is really unique. You're going to find piles of ejected frass, which are basically wood shavings, dumped near windowsills or baseboards. But the critical clue here is what's inside that pile. If you look closely, it'll be distinctly mixed with leftover insect fragments, dead ant parts, and empty pupal cases. Furthermore, their galleries inside the wood are as smooth as sandpaper and completely free of the mud or soil that termites tend to drag into their tunnels. Finally, Section 6. Let's test your detective skills. So now that we've comprehensively profiled all our major suspects, from the million-member subterranean syndicates to the elusive drywoods, the tunneling beetles, and the excavating ants, let's test what you've picked up. Think back to our earliest termite profile at the beginning of this explainer. Wood is incredibly tough and fibrous, right? So how exactly are these tiny bugs able to extract nutrients and digest solid cellulose? Is it bacteria, protozoa, enzymes, or all of the above? If you went with all of the above, you're spot on. Termites are just an absolute marvel of biology. They rely on a highly complex cocktail of single-celled protozoans, bacteria, and special enzymes right in their gut. In fact, young termite nymphs aren't even born with these microbes. They actually have to get them from older workers through an incredible food-sharing process called trophallaxis. Literally, teamwork at a microscopic level. Okay, for our final exam question, let's test your environmental profiling. Which elusive termite suspect operates as a true moisture misfit, requiring almost bone-dry wood, meaning moisture levels of less than 15% to survive and thrive? That would be the powder post termite, a very notorious member of the drywood family. Because they require absolutely no ground contact, they could be hiding literally anywhere above ground. Learning to read these distinct tells wraps up our case file for today. We've learned to read wings, frass, and exit holes like true detectives. But going through all this evidence really should leave you with one very important, maybe slightly unsettling thought. What hidden clues might be waiting to be discovered right now, just behind the drywall of your own home? Catch you on the next explainer.